Yes. What up, everyone? Welcome into the Don Bentley Show. Thank you for tuning in. This is Don Bentley, and you are in the middle of the Don Bentley Show. So, thank you so much for tuning in today. Uh, you know, and by the way, I want to say I'm not purposely trying to look like Ebro in the morning. Um, I just haven't got around to shave right now. I got a mess at the house. Things are really messed up. And quite frankly, I don't got no need to shave right now in 15-degree weather. So, but like I said, bear with me here. I'm not trying to purposely walk around looking like Ebro. So, but uh, today's show, I want to touch base on some things. I've been hearing a lot of takes on people's opinions and why Ebro got canceled and the show. And I just want to touch base on some points. I think that a lot of people are you know playing the blame game out there. A lot of people are trying to say that Ebro was out of touch with um, today's music, and a lot of out of touch with the younger generation. And I don't necessarily think that you know uh, they're all at fault or he's all at fault. I think there's you know everybody is entitled to their opinion, of course, and everybody has their point of view. And there's so many different things that are going on out there in the world today. So I wanted to just touch base on some things. My opinion. So the fact is, I do believe that hip hop as a whole and rap as a whole, you know, is not like it used to be. Not like it used to be. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say that hip hop is going under, rap is going under. I don't believe that. But I'll tell you a quick story. Okay, so me and my family, we were from South Brooklyn. Okay, I grew up till I was 17 years old. We were from near Union Street between 3rd and 4th Avenue. Okay, now growing up, now right now, so I'm 45 years old. Okay, and to be quite honest, me and my family, we haven't lived or been in New York City or Brooklyn for so long. I mean, we left. We had to leave in '97 when it was too hot. Things were just too getting too dangerous, too off the wall. Everything was going that bad. But to be quite honest, uh, what I'm trying to say is I don't believe that hip hop as a whole is representative of what New York used to be known for. Okay, for example, I'll go further into it. What I'm trying to convey is that when I was a kid, in Brooklyn, and things were very bad. Okay, and even before I was a teenager, growing up over there, uh, that's basically all we knew. The kind of rap and hip hop, that everybody over in New York City back then, most of us grew up on grimy, raw hip hop. Okay, the kind of hip hop that take no hostages type hip hop. The kind of rap that was as grimy as you could get. The kind of hip hop that was even more grimier than Wu Tang or the Lost Boys. We're talking about real street rap, street hip hop. Okay. Matter of fact, uh, just last night I was I was listening to Funk Flex and pulling up some of his shows, his sets that he did in like 95, 96. Okay? That's a perfect example of the kind of hip hop that this that kind of hip hop that he would have a lot of mixed sets doing. That was real street hip hop. That was hardcore rap. I honestly don't think that a lot of people in the same headspace that trying to have to hear all day in day out that kind of like hardcore rap hip hop. Not to say that hip hop is going under. I'm not trying to say that, but I think you had to be from a really really certain mental space, listening listening to like real grimy type hip hop, and that's what people are conflating. I don't think the majority of the rap and hip hop market is in any mood to perpetuate that anymore. Okay, for instance, I'll go further. Okay, New York, the last few years, like it or not, New York City has been changing. It's no longer even like South Brooklyn, downtown Brooklyn. I mean, it's no longer the slums that it used to be. Now, granted, I don't necessarily agree with the changes, because number one, nobody cared for families and people that were struggling, that were native New Yorkers. Everyone cared less, right? The city cared less. But once they see new money, out of town money come in, then they put up nice places to live, nice buildings. Everything is too bougie to afford even more, But my point is, everything is just switched up. Times have changed, Even young people, when you think about it nowadays, young people are not really on that grimy tip, because the truth is, it is very depressing. You gotta. It, I look at it this way, in my generation, I was, like I said, I'm 45 now, but growing up till I was 17 in New York as it used to be known, the real grimy type New York, I mean, that you were let's just put it this way. Back then, like me, I didn't even realize that, that's the griminess that we all grew up knowing, So I'm not saying that, you know it's either good or bad. I'm not trying to say that, it's this or that. This is just my opinion, but I believe that that's why there's a lot of riffs out there in hip hop culture right now, or that, people playing the blame game about why did Ebro get fired, and this and that. I don't believe it's anybody that is at fault, really. It's just, you know times are changing. The younger generation, even though they put out hip hop and rap, I honestly don't believe that they want to be in the headspace to be so grimy with their culture or their music, or like back in the day, when I was 16, back in New York, times have just really changed, and you can't really have any bad feelings towards anybody about it, um so, once again, thanks for tuning in to the Don Bentley Show. There's so many thoughts that I wanted to convey today, but this is episode one, so we'll keep at it, but I like I said, you know I, I the to be honest, the New York that I remember, most of that doesn't exist anymore. I'm not trying to say that, on a larger scale that New York is that different, but I'm trying to say, on a cultural level, on a, what was sentimental to me when I was growing up, like I said, as bad as things were for us growing up over there back then, but I always, I always, took pride in the fact that even though there was very bad things that were, you know, we had to deal with back then, you know, there was still some very, very nice things about coming up from there, um, lessons that you learn in life, that I'm glad that I grew up, learning over there. But like I said, the truth is, a lot of New York hip hop, what people that might not, whether you're younger generation, or you're not, you didn't grow up, born and raised growing up in New York City. What people don't understand is, like I said, this is where the confusion it stems from, in my opinion, because uh, a lot of New York City hip hop, a lot of it, you only really experienced the real true New York City hip hop, if you were born and raised, and you knew, like, coming up, being raised in the five boroughs, it was just a grimy time, like that's just how things were, and the music was a reflection of that, no doubt about it. So I don't try to look down on anybody, if they got differences of opinion, and maybe today's generation, they just, right? I believe a lot of people feel that, why be on that deep grimy tip when, why not be on a more positive tip, or why not so many other ways to, carry yourself or show in the music, being grimy. I'm not trying to say it was bad, good or bad either way, but like I said, the truth is that was a reflection of how we all had to come up. It was just that real. Growing up back then, NYC. But I don't think that many people nowadays in this generation. I don't think people necessarily want to carry around, with that deep griminess. I mean, you know, it's one thing, about trying to keep it real, but it's another thing. Are things that grimy like they were? I don't believe they are right now. And like I said, that's not to say that I necessarily agree with how New York City has changed. I don't agree with a lot of things, but at the same time, me myself, I'm 45 years old. I haven't lived in New York City for since '97 is when me and my family left. Which, a lot of people had no choice to leave. But thank you for tuning in. This is a Don Bentley show, episode 1. But like I said, I hear a lot of people, they hear that, Hot 97 is switching things up, and this and that. Like I said, and this is just my opinion, I'll say it once more before we go. Times changed. Times changed a long time ago, right? How long do you want to be on your grind? How long do you want hip hop as a whole to just be a New York City deep grimy type, music? Do you want Hot 97 to be just like it was, like in 1995, 96, playing such, grimy type, depressing type hip hop, where, yeah, come on now, I think human beings as a whole. I think we all have grown up since then. I think we all strive for more. I think we all. Now, that's not to say that real deep street hip hop. I'm not trying to say it doesn't still have a place out there. I'm just trying to say that honestly, half of the country or more than most of the country, I don't believe that they understand that deep type of New York City grime type hip hop. I mean, sure, people know the big artists, the mainstream artists, but you know, like I said, even back in the late '90s, we're talking about half the DJs on Hot 97, they were spinning, they were playing like the real hardcore like street grime hip hop. The way these artists didn't really even care how famous they got. They didn't care. They want their grime. They want the grime. You know, you gotta be of a certain mentality to keep. Like I said, I think as a whole, I think people just realize, you grow up, you get have a family, you have kids, you got. Why walk around? What for what reason? Why do you got to be on your grime like that? Where it's like, you know, uh, and like I said, a lot of people outside of New York City don't even realize that this was a thing. That hip hop, there's such big differences to where back then in New York, hip hop was that grimy. Talking about like like even more grimier than the Lost Boys, even more grimier than you know what I'm saying. So I think everyone everyone might be taking this Hot 97 thing a little bit too far. Just my opinion. It's just times have changed. That's it. That's it. Not to say that hip hop, real grimy. That not to say that that's done for either, but I think that retrospectively, I think in today's society, I think that there's so much going on, and people are just living their lives, and I don't think that in today's society right now at the moment, I just don't believe that people want to be on that deep grime type, you know. And in my opinion, I think that's where the disconnect is, because you got older people like me, at 45 and up. That's all we really knew coming up. That kind of hip hop, and that was a common thing on the radio. That's what was like, real street type, you know. And you could see throughout the country, you know, like I said, you really had to grow up in NYC to be that deep on the, it was a New York type. And before I go, the other last point I want to make is that you know there's so many out of town New York people, that weren't born and raised. They weren't, they're of a different type of New York person. There's probably, I would say, more than 50% of everybody walking around in the five boroughs now that they weren't even born and raised in New York. They're not a native New Yorker. Okay, so you got to remember that now. Hot 97 and all these companies, all these radio stations, now in their mind they got to say, well, how are we balancing out our programming, our markets? Because they know one thing. They know 50% of all these New Yorkers in the five boroughs now were not even born and raised native New Yorkers, right? So, that creates another scenario where things are not exactly as they seem. You got a lot of these out of towners with big money living in New York City, and they're walking around, 50% of these people make up native New Yorkers now, and they're not even really native New Yorkers, but they got big money. They live there now, and like it or not, for better or worse, there are companies like radio stations that are gonna think to themselves, well, do we really be that want to be that deep on our grime in 2025, 2026, or do we need to switch it up and try to cater to everybody? Being the fact that now it's new money in NYC, out of town money in NYC, people that didn't grow up, weren't born and raised in NYC. Now these people got big money here, and like I said, I don't agree with how a lot of things switched up in NYC, because I'm still resentful myself. I didn't like the fact that me and my family had to run out of there. 97, things were that hot, that bad. We were poor like everybody else. But just because, the color of someone's skin, a lot of people back then were on the tip, oh, you're this color, you're that, stereotyping, or, this the same way everybody else was poor. That's how poor me and my family were. But, because, you know, people just automatically assumed, oh man, your family look like you got money. Where you live in Staten Island? No, not at all. Me and my family were from South Brooklyn. I grew up on Union Street between 3rd and 4th Avenue. We were dirt broke, poor as hell, just like the next person. And like I said, I still got my own resentment about New York and what it meant to me. Because now the truth is, if I was rich and had money and I wanted to go back to NYC, I wouldn't even fit in anyway. Because I don't consider myself one of those out of town rich type, new money type New Yorkers. In my mind, I miss the griminess, right? In my mind, I can't believe what they did, even to like South Brooklyn. They switched it up.